Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. But today I brought for you all May June 2024 2281 variant 22. Like last time, this time also we'll be solving the response section A question. This question is very interesting. Why? Because they have brought for us various key macroeconomic indicators in this question. Like I discussed earlier, again, there are two strategies to solve this question. A, we can look at the questions first and then look at the data. Or B, we can read the data first and then answer the questions that follow. Well, I follow this strategy of reading the data, the text source first, and then answering the question. So let's see what this question has for us. Let's see what the case study says. Now, they've given us some fact files for Tunisia. They've given us the first table, and the table shows the trade in goods and services balance for 2020, which was around $3 billion. It shows a deficit. The primary and the secondary income balance is positive for $0.6 billion. Unemployment rate in Tunisia was 17% in 2020, and the exchange rate hovered around 1 TND was $0.35. Now, they say that the government had a budget deficit for a number of years. Between 2015 and 2020, the Tunisian government carried out a number of reforms in order to reduce its tax burden, and it relied more on indirect taxes, and it tried to implement the qualities of a good tax. How? By making the tax system more efficient and more economical. So, what are these? These are the two qualities of a good tax. All right. Next, what it did, it taxed. Besides taxing a range of products, the government also regulated the price of some of its goods, including flour and milk. Now, flour and milk, we all know, are basic necessities. So, it regulated the price of these two necessities. So, the government did it. Why? Because the control of the price in flour would help reduce poverty and prevent monopoly from exploiting their market power. So, the intention behind regulating the price of flour and milk was to regulate the monopoly firm's power and to reduce poverty. All right. The Tunisian government also subsidizes the production of electricity. So what does it does? The subsidy affects the cost of producing electricity, and the change in price electricity affects other firms' costs. This form of government spending can help reduce inflationary pressure and can also affect the efficiency of electricity production. So the plus point is that it would reduce the electricity pressure, but the negative aspect is that it would affect or negatively impact the efficiency of these firms, right? Because they will get over reliant on these subsidies. While some benefits from the subsidy on electricity production, they also experience periods when their cost of production rose. Tunisian shoe producers have recently experienced a rise in wage costs and a decline in the number of workers they employ. So now what have recently happened is that the Tunisian shoe producers have experienced a rise in their wage costs. So they have laid off workers, and the average wage paid to Tunisian workers and the Tunisian inflation rate changed between 2014 and 2020. So now by way of this diagram, they have showed us from 2014 till 2020 the change in the average wage rate and the inflation rate. So now if you look at the diagram carefully, what is happening is that the dashed line is showing the inflation rate, and the other curve is showing us the change in the average rate. So it's the change, it's not the rate of wage rate, it's the change in average wage rate. So now if you look closely at the diagram between 2014 till 2018, the change in the average wage rate has been more as compared to the inflation rate. So this means the average wage rate was higher, the change, than the inflation rate. So this means the real wages was rising up to 2018. But after 2018, you see what has happened is that the inflation rate was more and the change in average rate fell. Now both are falling. The change in average rate is also falling and the inflation rate is falling. But the change in inflation, the change in inflation is more than the change in the average wage. So this means here from 2018 till 2020, the real wages are falling. But from 2014 to 2018, the real wages were rising. Right? All right. Now they're talking us about unemployment, and they're saying unemployment has been a problem in Tunisia for many years. In 2020, the government passed a law which promised that workers who had been unemployed for 10 years or more would then be employed by the public sector. So then means the responsibility would then fall on the government or the public sector firms to employ those workers who have been unemployed for a period of more than 10 years. This means what? Structural employment, right? To reduce the time spent between moving jobs, it increased the labor market information available to workers and employers and did not raise unemployment benefit in line with inflation. So now in order to address the issue of frictional unemployment, the government did what? It increased the dissemination of information both to workers and employers regarding the job vacancies or the people who are seeking jobs to the employers, and it did not raise the unemployment benefit with the rate of inflation. That means the unemployment benefit was lesser as compared to the prevailing rate of inflation. Why? It did that purposely so that the people do not get over reliant on the unemployment benefits. However, they tend to utilize their skills and be a part of the labor force, right? So they wanted to encourage people to search for jobs and get employed rather than getting dependent upon the unemployment benefit. So this is in order to reduce frictional unemployment. Next, what did the government do? The Tunisian exchange rate fluctuated in 2020, and in turn, it affected the country's exports and imports, and the current account balance of payment, economic growth, inflation, and unemployment. All right, now let's look at the questions. The first question says, calculate Tunisia's balance on the current account on its balance of payment. It's a 1-mark question. All you need to do is calculate. Now, if we look back, the very first table gave us certain statistics that we will use in order to derive at the figure of Tunisia's balance on the current account of its BUP. Now, in order to calculate the amount for the current account, we know that we add in 4 components: the trade-in value for goods and the trade-in value for services, the primary income balance and the secondary income balance. Now, in this table, they've given us the trade-in goods and services balance. So we'll take this figure and we'll take in the primary and the secondary income balance. We'll add the two together in order to arrive at the value of current account balance. So now you look at this, how I have calculated. On the left-hand side, Tunisia's balance in the current account of its balance of payment. First, I mentioned the trade in goods and services balance, that was a negative $3 billion. Then primary and secondary income balance was a positive $0.6 billion. We add the two together, so it will again be a deficit of a negative $2.4 billion, or you can say a deficit of $2.4 billion. That's the current account balance. You've shown this, you've calculated this, 1 mark will be awarded. All right. Part B. Part B says, identify 2 qualities of a good tax that the Tunisian government aimed to achieve. Any 2 qualities of a good tax. We had earlier identified the good qualities, right, of a tax, which was to make the tax system more efficient and to make it more economical. So now we say the tax should be efficient, meaning that the tax should aim to address market failure, should aim to reduce the negative externalities, thereby improving efficiency and improving the overall performance. B, the tax should also be economical. What does that mean? It means that the cost of collecting the tax must be lesser than the intended benefits it aims to collect from those taxes. This means that the benefits of collecting the tax must outweigh the cost of collecting the tax, right? This way it should be economical. So you need to identify those 2 good qualities of a tax and explain them in a line. And so you will be able to attain full 2 marks for this part B. Part C. Now, part C is asking us to explain one reason why the Tunisian government regulated the price of flour and milk. It's a 2 mark question. Now, the examiners have concluded that what a lot of candidates did was that they gave in 2 reasons. If you read the question carefully, they are asking us to identify only one reason. So then how would the marks be allocated? 1 mark is for the explanation of the reason and 1 mark is for the identification. So first you need to identify any one reason and explain that in order to get full 2 marks. So you could say that milk and flour are basic necessities or essentials. So the government regulated the price of both milk and flour in order to make them more affordable or to make them more accessible. Or you could say that in order to prevent the monopoly firms from exploiting the market and in order to stop them from charging higher prices, the government regulated the price of flour and milk. So any of these 2 reasons, any one of these 2 reasons, identifying and explaining it will give you full 2 marks. So always reread the question and be careful before you attempt it. All right? Part D. Part D is a 4-mark question. It's asking us to explain 2 ways the Tunisian government tried to reduce frictional unemployment. Now, again, examiners were of the view that a lot of candidates had mentioned that the Tunisian government intended to employ workers who were unemployed for more than 10 years. So now 10 years is not a frictional unemployment. 10 years would refer to structural unemployment, right? If we are talking about frictional unemployment, so first let's recall what does frictional unemployment means. Frictional unemployment is what? Temporary unemployment, right? Which arises from workers being in between jobs, right? Now, how would these 4 marks be distributed? 1 mark for identification is the first way. An explanation of that way would yield you 2 marks. And the 3rd mark would be awarded for identification in the second way. And the final 4th mark for explanation of that second way. So like I said earlier, what is frictional unemployment? That the government tried to increase information available to both workers and employers, and it did not raise unemployment benefit in line with inflation. So we will utilize these 2 points and explain them to get full 4 marks. The first reason, the government did not raise unemployment benefit in line with inflation so as to discourage people from relying on unemployment benefits, instead to be a part of the labor force. Or B, you could say increase labor market information available to employers and workers. So if the information is available to workers, what would happen? The mobility of workers would increase. It would reduce job search time, right? It would increase awareness of job vacancies, right? And if this information is available to employers, so they would know about those who are seeking jobs. So it would be a 2-way benefit, both for the workers and for the employers, right? Hope this is clear. All right, part E. Part E is asking us to analyze the relationship between the change in Tunisia's average wage and inflation rate. It's a 4-mark question. In order to answer this question, we have to look at this diagram. All right. Now, this diagram has shown 2 things. A, it's showing the change in the average wage rate, and B, it's showing the inflation rate. Now, like I had discussed earlier, from 2014 till 2018, the average wage rate, the change in the average wage rate had been more than the inflation rate, which means the real wages were rising. From 2018 to 2018, the inflation rate was more than the change in the average wage rate, which meant that the real wages was falling. Now, if you're talking about what type of relationship, the first thing in answering this question is you need to identify what sort of a relationship exists. Whether it's a direct relationship or an indirect, it's a positive or a negative. So now if you look at carefully, that both the wage rate, the change in the wage rate and the inflation rate are moving in the same direction. So both are rising or both are falling. From 2014 to 2018, both are rising, and from 2018 to 2020, from 2014 to 2018, both were rising. From 2018 to 2020, both were falling. They both went in the same direction, meaning there exists a direct relationship. The first thing you'll mention in this question is that there exists a positive relationship. Both rose and fell together. As the change in average wage rate rose, so did the inflation rate. Or you could say, as the change in average wage rate fell, so did the inflation rate. You mentioned that 2 marks will be awarded. Next, you'll give in the evidence and you'll give in the explanation. Again, you'll say between 2014 to 2018, the average wage rate rose more than the inflation rate. Thus, real wages rose. From 2018 to 2020, the rate of inflation was higher than the inflation rate, right? See, the dotted line is above than this straight line, which means that the average wage rate was what? Lesser. So the real wages fell. So now, when from 2014 to 2018, the real wages were higher, so what happened? The rise in the average wage rate implies that there was an increase in disposable income. There was an increase in disposable income. There were more spending by people. As a result, there could have been an increase in demand pull inflation. Similarly, it also meant that there could have been an increase in cost push inflation. Why? Because the average wage rate was rising, right? That's the explanation. So you've done that. Full 4 marks will be awarded to you in this part. Part F. Part F is asking us to analyze using a demand and supply diagram how an increase in wage cost would affect the market for shoes. Now you need to identify how the increase in wages would affect the market for shoes using a demand and a supply diagram. No, it's a 5-mark question. So 4 marks is allocated towards the drawing of the demand and supply diagram, and 1 mark is for the explanation. Now look at the left hand side and I'll explain you how it goes. 1 mark is awarded for the correct access. The 2nd mark would be awarded for drawing of the initial demand and the supply diagram curves. The 3rd mark will be awarded to you for drawing the new supply curve. And the 4th mark will be awarded for labeling correctly the 2 equilibrium points. And the final 5th mark would be awarded for an explanation. Now, let's look at the diagram. Now there has been what? There has been an increase in wages. So now initially, you'll show this is the price on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis, you will display the quantity. You will show the initial demand curve, which is a downward sloping, and you'll show the initial supply curve. And this is the equilibrium point, and this is the P, the initial price, and this was Q, the initial quantity. Now, when there was an increase in wage cost, the supply curve shifted inwards. You'll show it by way of arrow. As a result, when there was an increase in the wage costs, so the price, the cost of production would rise, which means that the price would rise. As a result, there's a fall in the quantity supplied, and the quantity supplied shifted to Q1, and the price rose from P to P1. Right? So again, I've given an explanation that an increase in wage costs meant that there was an increase in cost of production, which would increase the price of shoes. So this is how you link it. And once you've done that, full 5 marks will be awarded to you. Hope this is clear. Part G. Part G says, discuss whether or not the Tunisian government should continue to subsidize electricity production. In this part, they are asking us whether it's good for a government to subsidize electricity or not. Now, earlier we had identified that though subsidizing was reducing the inflationary pressure, yet it was also affecting the efficiency of electricity production, right? So now let's see, it's a discuss mark question, and let's see what we have to say in this part. All right. Here it goes. So if you say why it should subsidize electricity production, we would say that the Tunisian government should subsidize electricity production because the cost of producing electricity would fall. Thereby, the supply of electricity would increase. It would make it more affordable, right? So the affordability would increase. So the poverty level would reduce because now more and more people could afford consumption of electricity. So the standard of living of people would rise, and people would then be having more money to spend on, let's say, education or healthcare. So again, the standard of living would improve. On the other hand, how will it benefit firms? Firms will have a reduction in the cost of production because the cost of electricity is now falling. So they could transfer this reduction in the cost of production in the form of lower prices of their goods. And in turn, they could utilize this saving in their cost of production by investing more in capital goods or improving the quality of their products. So this would improve the quality of their products and their export competitiveness would also rise, right? So what would happen? That the GDP of the country would also increase and the exports would also increase. There would be a favorable current account balance or the balance of payment of the country could improve, right? Similarly, MNCs, multinational companies would also be attracted. Why? Because when there would be lower cost of production, you would invest in your country. And as a result, then unemployment of your country would reduce and the GDP of your country would improve. So as a result, again, standard of living would increase. So economic growth would be witnessed by Tunisia, right? But then it could also be that it might not be feasible for a government to continue subsidizing electricity production. Why? Because then the firm would get over dependent and it might be that it might get inefficient, right? Or it could also be that it may not pass on the benefit of this reduction in the cost of production in the form of lower prices to people. Or it could be that by continuously providing subsidies, a government would having a budget deficit, like it said earlier. So this means that its expenses, expending would be greater than its revenues. So in order to compensate for this budget deficit, it would might be imposing more taxes. And this means imposing more taxes would again means that the people might not be better off. So it might not be good in that situation. And then again, if the government is spending more on subsidizing electricity, it means that it has scarce resources. So it involves an opportunity cost. So spending more on subsidizing electricity would mean that it is spending less on, let's say, healthcare or the provision of education or maybe better infrastructure. So it's sacrificing on the spending of infrastructure. So it might be that the people might not be better off, right? So in order for Tunisia to decide on whether to continuously subsidize electricity production, it has to meticulously weigh the benefits and the costs, and this decision of the government should go ahead only if the economy overall is benefiting more rather than its costs, right? It's bearing the cost. So again, you need to link it properly, develop the chain clause analysis, and conclude with a valid conclusion. And full 6 marks would be awarded to you. So you will gear yourself up for that higher tier level 3 response. Hope this is clear. Part H. Part H is again a discussed question and is asking us whether or not a rise in the value of Tunisian dinar would benefit the Tunisian economy. So now they are saying, do you think that the economy would overall benefit if there is an appreciation of Tunisian dinar? So now we all know if we say that yes, Tunisian economy would benefit, so we would say how that there would be an appreciation of the Tunisian dinar. So this means what? This means that the imports would get cheaper and the imports would get cheap and the exports would get expensive. All right. So this means that when the imports are getting cheap, so the firms might be able to procure raw material at a cheaper rate, or machinery that was previously expensive, the equipment that was previously expensive now at low prices. So its cost of production would then fall and efficiency would then rise. And when the cost of production would fall, so then its might be passing on in the form of lower price goods to people. And households will be then be able to buy more of imported goods. They will be enjoy more of imported goods and services. So they would have a wide variety of goods and they would have access to more imported goods, which previously might not be possible since previously imports were expensive, but now they're not. MNCs might also be attracted because the cost of production would fall and they might be more inclined towards investment in your country. However, it could be that it might not be benefit. Why? Because when your exports are getting expensive, so your exports are losing their export competitiveness. And as a result, your country would witness a fall in its exports earning and your balance of payment would be adversely affected. Why? Because imports would rise and exports would fall. So the current account situation would worsen. And it could be that the current account balance would get further more in a deficit situation, right? And similarly, it would mean that your demand for the domestically produced goods is falling because people are now switching to cheaper alternatives. So this means that since aggregate demand would be falling, so firms would be laying off labor. So there would be a rise in unemployment levels. So when unemployment would rise, the standard of living of people would fall. And then when aggregate demand is also falling and unemployment is also rising, so economic growth would fall. So it may be worsening of the situation. So again, whether or not a rise in the value of Tunisian dinar would benefit the Tunisian economy would depend upon whether it is adversely affecting the economic growth or the standard of living or whether it is positively affecting. And this decision would be only beneficial as long as there is a rise in the standard of living and the benefits outweigh the costs. All right. Hope you've enjoyed solving this paper with me and it was useful for you. Let me know through your feedback. Stay tuned, subscribe, happy learning, take care.